Welcome, everyone, to the second installment of the Tech Town Hall, hosted by myself, William Golde of PTZOptics and HuddleCamHD. Now, this week, we will be talking about all things NDI. We're just going to be going over the technology as a whole, how it's used, where it came from, where it is, and where it's going. We'll touch on a few other topics throughout about how we at PTZOptics and HuddleCam are using the NDI technology in our products, and then how you as a client, customer, producer, whatever you are out there in the world, can potentially use and leverage NDI. Now, this week we are joined by Matt Davis. He is actually our director of IT here at Haverford Systems, the parent company of PTZOptics and HuddleCam. And him and Steven, if you remember from last episode, is our product evangelist. We'll be going through the NDI technology, what it is, how we use it, and some use cases thereof. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Steven and Matt. Gentlemen, take it away. Tell us a little bit about NDI.
Well, I think, Matt, we should start about where NDI came to be, right? The company NewTek started NDI before they branched off to an actual brand, right? You guys can check it out, ndi.tv. So this is where you can download any and all of the different tools for both Mac and PC, anything that we're going to be talking about today. And Matt, we have a lot to talk about today with these tools, right?
Yeah, there's no shortage. It's a topic that could easily span a very large amount of time, but we will try and keep it a little concise so that we just hit on the hot topics, and hopefully you know the right questions and words to use when starting to dive deeper.
So I thought one of the things that we could go through with everybody, because everybody, that's into this technology, we could start with our cameras, right? We could talk about how our cameras have NDI pre-built into the cameras, right?
Yeah. So a couple years ago, we got an amazing request to start working on this new thing called NDI that they wanted to put on our cameras. And I was a little confused at first, but after getting a tiny demo of what the dreams for NDI were going to be, it seemed like a no-brainer. This is a future interface that I think everyone will be leveraging, really.
Well, and for those that are asking, what is NDI? What does it stand for? What's the acronym? And it stands for Network Device Interface, which essentially means it works over network, over IP, over, well, we'll get into the internet, but it works over your local LAN, right? Over the network.
Exactly. I mean, the big thing here is that, much like we've seen happen in other industries, we're now seeing networks and computers start to attach themselves to, video production and UC workspaces. And NDI is just an easy method of doing that. So, you might be sitting there and feel like you've seen IP video going on for a long time, whether it was in security cameras or elsewhere. What differentiates something like NDI is it's based on high quality, low latency. It's able to do things that you wouldn't normally find, in traditional solutions, and it's easy to set up in comparison.
Well, and that's something. There's a lot to say about that with the cost, right? On the previous episode of this, we went through my studio and I was talking about how NDI is a lot easier to set up. There's a lot less expense in the long run because you're not buying capture cards, you're not buying all these cables, SDI, HDMI cables, and most of the software switchers that are out there on the market, and even hardware switchers, are now adopting NDI, and we're going to kind of get into a little bit of that here in just a few seconds. But I think that in itself, and we're going to show that the ease of setting up for your video production is leaps and bounds over figuring out resolutions, right, with capture cards when you're adding them.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we could even touch on early days of IP video where you needed to know a million characteristics about the IP video feed. But I think you hit on a very interesting topic there, which is, the cost to upgrade. I feel like we're at a very interesting point because we're seeing a lot of 4K sources coming about and people starting to pump out 4K content. And that's where I think NDI, we've seen it shine, but I think this is going to be a real glory moment for it. you have existing 1080 cameras and you look at upgrading them, you're going to be upgrading your cabling, you're going to be upgrading your physical switchers, you're going to be upgrading any capture equipment that you've got. So just in equipment costs, it's going to be expensive, not even taking into account the labor and time associated. Whereas with NDI, maybe your PC needs a new GPU. Maybe it's going to need a new license for your vMix to upgrade to 4K. But the reality is it's nowhere near the expense of traditional equipment and upgrading it to 4K.
No, absolutely. And like, take for instance, I have a piece of software here for if you guys are wondering, a lot of e-gamers or esports folks that are out there streaming their gameplay. This is a piece of software that I used to use a lot, was a Streamlabs OBS. It's a foundation of OBS. Just in their product here alone, like if we hit the plus sign here, they give it to you built in NDI source. Okay. So when I hit add source, it's going to ask me what I want to call it. I can call this, I'll just back this up here real quick. And I call it cam. And then I'm just going to click add source. The cool part about this, as you can see, it finds the first, because it's in alphabetical order, it finds the first camera that's available here. But there's a list of cameras that I can grab and bring into my production just like that. No capture card needed, so I can click OK. I'll just hit done. I can set the resolutions and things like that. I'll bring audio in if it has it. And this is just in a free piece of software. If this is a 4K camera, Matt, I can bring it in. I didn't have to do anything except for run my Ethernet cable.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, as much as this is going to seem a little bit silly, every time I see that list populate and then you select a camera and it goes instantly live into your software, my mind is just like, woo, this is amazing every time, because that same thing used to be a lot of configuration to get an IP video feed in a reliable, high quality fashion. It's incredible.
And I mean, so there's free solutions like that. And I know Matt's going to show OBS in a little bit, but there's also paid solutions. Like here we have Wirecast from Telestream. You can click the plus sign here, and under the network tab, you look at all these NDI sources that I have, everything from TriCaster sources. And that's the beauty of it too. You don't have to be just in the Wirecast world or vMix world or OBS world or TriCaster. You can pull sources from TriCaster live to air, which is what you're using for video conferencing right now. Anything that's supporting NDI, you can bring that into your production. So you can daisy chain productions. So, I mean, I could essentially grab this source, bring it in here. You're going to see it populate. It's the same camera. Brings it right into the production. It gives you the 1920 by 1080, 30 frames per second. That's what I'm doing. I didn't have to change anything. It's just that simple. I click on it. Matt comes in. No problem. Easy.
Yep.
So, those of you looking out there and wondering why go NDI, and I mentioned this in the last episode, that's why. It's easy. You pop it in. Even as far as the NewTek Tricaster, right? So I run a Tricaster here in the studio, so I am able to come up under any of these inputs. And I'm just going to kind of grab one here that you guys can see under the source here. It gives me all my NDI inputs that I can choose from and just grab. In fact, I'm not going to grab one because I have my shots set up, but every shot in here in the TriCaster, every source, every video source you're seeing, my camera, everything is all NDI. I am not using SDI. I'm not using HDMI. I'm not using anything. It's all NDI. I've completely, Matt, transitioned over to that workflow.
Well, and I think especially for someone like you, Stephen, that you like to explore the new things that are coming to production. You don't leave it for other people to sit and teach you about it years later. Moving to a workflow around NDI starts to open up a lot of doors for extreme flexibility, doing things with video that you could never do with traditional hardware. And that you can tinker without, messing up your production. So to me, yet again, for anyone that doesn't want to kind of rely on just what they know and wants to keep pushing their production forward to give everyone that they're creating this content for the best possible experience, really leveraging NDI is going to do wonders for your production.
Yeah. So why don't you show a few of the other sources that you have? vMix, you have
Yeah.
OBS, and then we'll get into some of the other tools that you can get for free from NDI.
Yeah, let's take a peek at vMix here to start. All right, so here's our vMix. And now you can see the little pop-up windows. We've got our little spinny thing going on there. And as you can see, these are all of the sources that can be found on this network. The list kind of goes on and on and on and on. I'll bring in this one, which is an external camera. And as you can see, you know, that it was very easy. The source is in, it's live. You can see the video going on. Now we can do the same thing with OBS, and you'll see it is just as easy. NDI source is just a fine name for me. And again, this is where all these NDI sources available. And keep in mind, there's a lot of options to fine tune your NDI source if you want to. And here we have the same video feed now into OBS.
So there's a lot of options that you can have in software switchers and in hardware solutions that we demonstrated here for you guys. But Matt, there's also a free set of tools that you can get, like I mentioned earlier, that you can download.
We'll start with one called NDI Access Manager.
So what would be the purpose for
NDI
this?
Access Manager gets really interesting. It's for anybody who is trying to do some fancy footwork on a network or trying to troubleshoot or work around a problematic network. This tool is incredible. So just some very basic things. You see the NDI groups here. As you can see, you can create different NDI groups. Public is there by default, and most NDI devices by default are part of public. So you can see them, you can share them. It's public. You can also create private ones. So you can see I've got my name here. I've got another one that's zone 10. Essentially, if I assign one of our cameras to be a part of the Davis group, what's going to happen is, unless somebody else in NDI Access Manager has this set to receive from Davis, they're never even going to see that source. So it's an easy way to hide sources. It's an easy way to group sources. So it can become very, very easy to manage your content. As can be seen here, anything coming out of your PC, you can do the exact same thing. External sources. So this is where you can define a public IP. If you have a camera that can't be discovered on a network, you can make a hard entry in here and force that camera to be discovered. Advanced, I won't go into too many of the details, but if you're trying, having some trouble receiving content, you can force different types of communication across your network. You can enable multicast and go a step further. If you don't want to leverage all the MDNS traffic across your network, not a problem. You can deploy the free NDI Discovery Server and point all of your sources there, at which point everything is going to go away from your network with regards to MDNS and rely on the Discovery Server. This is one a lot of you have probably heard some noise around lately. So this is NDI Bridge. NDI Bridge allows you to take your NDI sources and work with remote content. So as an example, I'm here in Philadelphia or outside of Philadelphia. Steven is in Ohio. I could actually gain access to Steven's cameras and control them from here in Philadelphia, even though I am not at his location. And then last part, this is where you can use the local settings within here to change how the feed is being translated across your network.
So all these tools, these two that Matt just showed, these are free solutions that you can get in the NDI tools package. There's a few other ones that you can actually get as well. This was one that Matt actually brought up, the NDI Test Patterns, right?
Yeah, this is a great app. If you don't know what's going on, you're troubleshooting, boot up the test patterns. It's going to be able to generate a pure NDI source that has video, it has audio, and is an easy way to troubleshoot. Do you have network problems? Are you having switcher problems, software problems, OS problems? You can really start to isolate where the problems are occurring with this handy little tool.
So having that ability within the free app, the free tools, you get different test patterns that you can choose from. As you can see here, I've got a bunch of them here inside. Pull it into your favorite switcher, or you could pull it into other apps. So I have down here like Video Monitor, right? Video Monitor allows you to pull in any of the different inputs that you have here. You can see my NDI sources that I have here. I could just simply click on it. There's that camera again. I could come in here and change it basically to any one of these cameras or the outputs, or here's the test patterns. I can choose that. There's your test pattern video here. Actually, let me change it to this so we can see. There you go. So you can see that it brings in the test patterns. These are all free tools. Virtual input. This is something, Matt, we're using right now to send a signal to the studio in Westchester to be able to bring in, whatever source we want to bring in. So I can tell them I want to send the TriCaster's Mix 1. I want to send that over a virtual input. So that way in the live to air, I select NDI Virtual Input, and it then grabs the feed from the TriCaster with audio and sends it. So there's a plethora. I have the launcher here pulled up, and you can use this for iOS or Android. If you guys watched the demonstration last month where I walked around the studio, that was using an NDI app for my iPhone. But these are all the apps. I mean, you can bring graphics in, Matt, that we didn't even touch on any of that. You can bring in graphics. You can bring in all kinds of cool stuff from NDI.
One of the beauties here is that the NDI tools themselves are free. So if anybody's curious about playing with NDI, there's really no barrier to entry. They can start playing with NDI today. They can play with it in their workflows. They don't really need to invest in anything extra. So for anybody who might be on the fence, they can just simply download the free NDI tools and start to explore what NDI has to offer. On that note, one other thing I just have to share here, because I feel like it doesn't get brought up very often. So on Windows, one of the free tools, you just saw Video Monitor. It's called Studio Monitor if you're on Windows. And you can see here's the camera. In theory, you can control it, which that's cool. But the bigger feature is if you're running Studio Monitor on a computer, you actually have a little web page associated with the app. So you can remotely reach out and touch this and change sources, like you'll see right here. And now you will see Studio Monitor has just switched. So just one of those nifty things to keep in mind. It's an easy way to decode the video and yet gain control over what's being seen. And of note, if you have multiple monitors, you will be able to see them here and control each independently.
Matt, let's talk a little bit about network, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions that's going to come up, and that was a big hiccup even in my studio. We had discussed, and I know a lot of people ask the question, what's my optimal network setup? What do I need to do? What are some best practices that you can give them for network setup?
Yeah. So networks, just like anything else, if you can keep it simple, guess what you should do? Keep it simple. So that being said, if you can get away with a single switch solution, you're going to make your life much easier by only having a single switch in the mix. If you need to start looking at adding more switches, don't daisy chain them. That's one of the biggest things I see go on. People will have their initial network switch. They need to add another one, so they daisy chain off the first one. Oh, all of a sudden they need more, so they daisy chain off the second one to a third one. And what winds up happening here is something called hops. So as you jump in between each of those switches, even the ports, you're making a hop. You really don't want to be going over 3 to 4 hops or else you're going to be causing all sorts of issues for reliable connection, speed. The list kind of goes on and on. So I will just state, rather than daisy chaining all of those, think hub and spoke, like an old wagon wheel. Use one switch in the center and have all of them spider out from that one switch if you need more than one. Little things like that can go a very, very long way. Separating your production traffic. That's another great one. Building an isolated network that does not touch your internet or anything else. And it's just for all of your IP connected audio or video devices. Can go a really long way. And the other beauty there, now your production system can be connected directly to your router, which means you're going to be getting the highest quality connection for that video feed you're trying to send out and share with the world.
Those are some good tips, because I know I struggled with that in the beginning. I was one of those guys. I was like, I'll buy an 8-port switch and I'll put it in there, and then I'll just do like everybody else does, and I'll just daisy chain off of that. And
that story is very common, and when you hear it, it makes really good sense. Nobody has. Where do you go and find information about how to set up a network in these proper configurations and recommendations? You see tons of people that'll drill into nitty-gritty details and all these other crazy concepts, but a basic network design is oddly kind of hard to find some good information on.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things that I think trip people up a lot, because they don't know. I mean, everybody's got, just like me, I knew enough about networking to be dangerous. Fortunately, I didn't have any hiccups. It did improve speed for transferring data when you had me switch it, but for some people though, Matt, it's causing a lot of problems. So these tips can absolutely help. Is there anything else that they can look? Is there certain ports or anything that you can share with people?
There are two things I would also throw out there as warnings, which are, you do not, even though you can do this, do not necessarily try to use a consumer wireless router with wireless to wired adapters and expect to have a reliable, high quality production go on. It is a fun thing to tinker with. There are high quality options, but Wi-Fi is something that it inherently has issues with reliable data delivery. The only other thing, and it's because I've heard it coming up pretty frequently, ideally do not have your little IoT equipment, Alexas, Google Homes, Nest thermostats, things like that, on the same network as your production equipment. It will just clog up your network and yield some very frustrating troubleshooting experiences.
Some good tips. I think we'll send it over to Will and see if he's got any questions for us, or comments, or even some ideas. Will?
Some of the questions that I get asked all the time when I'm interacting with clients or potential clients, when we're talking about PTZOptics and HuddleCam product, this is a very acronym heavy industry, we'll call it. So there is NDI HX, there's NDI HB, there's NDI 5. Can the both of you just kind of touch briefly on the differences between those? Because it's all NDI, but they're not all the same. They all kind of function differently. So if you could just talk to that real quick.
Yeah. So obviously NDI is the core concept, the core product. And what has splintered out of that are different versions. So we can boil that down initially to two styles of NDI that exist. So there's NDI HB, which stands for high bandwidth. So these are streams that'll consume over 100 megs usually on your network. They are very, very high quality. If you wanted to use them for archival purposes, that's really a great use for them. That being said, not everybody has the ability to move that bandwidth around their network easily. So that's where NDI HX comes in. It's HX for high efficiency. And you're typically looking at streams that will be in that 12 to 14 meg. So substantially less than NDI HB. That being said, you do forego some of the quality, at least currently, when moving from to HX. Now, when you say NDI v5, that is an actual version. So just like there's different, editions of your iPhone as they've got new, better technology to give you, there's the same thing with NDI. So there was, an NDI 1, 3, 5 is where we're at now. Ultimately, it's just as they add new features, they make it accommodate more things. You're seeing new versions of NDI come out. So ultimately, currently, the way you'd look at it would be something like NDI version 5 HX and NDI version 5 HP. Just an easy way to kind of bring all of that together.
Quickly just touch, because people always ask, they're like, "Oh, well, what's the difference between Dante and NDI? Why don't I just do video over IP?" Like, what are the advantages of either, both? Obviously, there's give and take. Just speak to that a little bit. What is good about NDI that differentiates it from other IP workflows, and then potentially what are those differences and how are they highlighted?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's somewhat easy to understand, although it's getting a little cloudier here as time continues.
Mm.
If you really look at Dante, they were born out of being an amazing audio company. So their strong focus has traditionally been on audio, and they do an amazing job of handling audio over IP. And they do a great job of working with a lot of, like, if you're doing pro AV installations, they do a really good job of making sure that the Dante solutions are available or work with a lot of that traditional pro AV equipment. Um, on the other hand, you have NDI, which really came from a broadcast background and a strong focus on very high quality video. So you really have one company that came from video, one company that came from audio, and they're really presenting, these strong legacies in their products. Now, I mentioned it's gotten a little cloudier, and that's because you do now see where Dante has added video and where NDI has added audio to their solution. So I think at the moment we might be playing the game of seeing what the future holds, and what products start to emerge under the NDI audio or the Dante video. I think it's going to be really, really fun to kind of watch unfold and explore as it's happening.
What are some of the most efficient ways? What are some of the best ways for people to use NDI in a remote sense?
This is a perfect opportunity for NDI Bridge to handle that, where you could be at home, you're grabbing those sources from the standpoint of you're bringing it into like your switcher, your software, hardware, and you're switching it. I know a lot of houses of worship, they'll remote in using like a team viewer solution, and they'll control the software or hardware solution that they have available and do that kind of remote switching option. But I think as Bridge is developing, I think that's going to be the best solution. And I know maybe in a future episode of Tech Town Hall, we can kind of demonstrate the Bridge and how we've done it from here to that studio there, and even Matt to your office.
Yeah, that's something I definitely would love to explore and showcase for people. And to kind of even take it a little bit further, with the Bridge, like we talked about, we can share sources between two different locations, and that is really, really cool. Now, the caveat there is obviously that starts to be a lot of bandwidth, one camera, two cameras, three cameras, four cameras. So not everybody probably is going to have full capabilities to use NDI Bridge that way. That being said, there is a very nifty feature, again, in the which allows you to share not only your screen, but to enable something called KVM. For anyone not familiar, that's a way where essentially you have one keyboard and mouse that gets shared amongst multiple computers. So using Scan Converter on the production PC that's on site, you can remote into that using NDI Bridge and the Scan Converter. You don't need to be paying for monthly fees associated with a remote, utility. So there are multiple ways to leverage Bridge, even if you're limited on bandwidth, to do remote productions.
That's actually a great segue because there's another acronym floating out there in the Pro AV and broadcast space, and that's SRT. So, from my understanding, NDI Bridge is almost a direct competitor for SRT in a way, correct? And so, can you speak to the differences between NDI, NDI Bridge, and then this SRT that we're starting to hear more and more about?
So, I mean, I can at least start with SRT was originally built to replace RTMP. So, for most people, RTMP is what tend to a CDN, such as Wowza, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, the list kind of goes on and on and on. And what it is very, very good at is ensuring that in a high efficiency manner with respect to bandwidth, it is transferring the content in a very reliable fashion so that you do not have hiccups once it reaches the far end. It is a great way for one studio to transfer its production to another. Where it is not ideal and where something like NDI Bridge comes in is if you actually want to, say, be tracking an individual on a stage remotely. That's where SRT has inherent latency built in, whereas NDI does everything it can to minimize latency. So, they each have their purpose. They each are great at what they do. But think about, NDI Bridge is really trying to capture those live shows and where you might need to be doing a lot more production. And SRT is kind of, hey, if you got a bunch of static cameras and are just scene switching, it's going to do everything you need. Or if you're pushing to another studio or a CDN, it's great. But it might not be the right solution if you're trying to follow an individual who's moving around on a stage.
What are some things that you can kind of solve for to maybe prevent latency in your video productions using NDI? And then what's kind of the expectation about latency once you make the jump from, say, like an SDI workflow to an NDI workflow?
So I'm using an SDI feed, an NDI feed right now. So you're going to bear with me here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the camera to an SDI feed and see if you can see the difference and see if there's latency in it. So now I'm on an SDI feed. Now you saw it change, okay? But is there latency? Is there any difference in the feed that you're seeing?
Mm-hmm.
Probably
Not really.
not.
No, looks pretty good.
It's going to be exactly. Let me see if I can go back to my other cam here. Let's see if it switches, and we're still in the same. So I was going back and forth between SDI and NDI, and there's really no latency here. And I think Matt, in our tests, from your office, and even Mike, who's producing this right now, him and I, we were seeing like no latency over Bridge to where like you could carry on a conversation using NDI Bridge in that fashion, right?
Yeah, it operated very naturally. The main concerns I would say around latency are going to be mostly probably related to your network, your PC. If you're experiencing that latency, it's going to be something related to those. And we could even go a step further. If you're using OBS, it might be the decoder that you're choosing to use. Not all of these pieces of software and solutions are created equal. Some are more efficient at what they do, and hence are going to offer you lower latency. So it's just one of those. If you're experiencing latency, there's probably a bunch of things that you can try to cut your latency down.
Okay,
got it.
So here, let me see if I can do something here, Matt. So what I'm going to do is, okay, I'm going to cut to me here, okay? And now I have potted up, and I can show you guys here in input 15. I'm going to show you. I have two of me up in the corner here in input 1 and input 2, the TriCaster. You can see that, right? I'll wave so you guys can see. It's the exact same shot. One's SDI, one's NDI. So I'm going to see if you guys can tell the difference. And I'm going to switch in real time. I'm switching back and forth right now. And just to prove it, you could see I'm doing that, right? Okay. So I'm switching between SDI and NDI. So that's why I wanted to do that just as a demonstration to show. I show that to people all the time when they're like, well, why would you go to all NDI? Like, aren't you worried about latency?
Do have latency with NDI. Like, look at your computer, right? It's all about computing power at the base. We talked about that in the studio episode as well. Look at your network. Look at your decoder. So there's all those pieces of the chain that you can look into if you are experiencing latency. It's never just one thing. Again, when we're talking about productions like this, they're a little bit complex. You do kind of have to troubleshoot. So that was actually JC's core question: was what can you do to solve for latency? And it sounds like just trace it back, right, from camera.
Yeah,
to
you
all
just
the ways
like
until it
troubleshooting
gets-
anything.
Mhm.
You start at one end of it and you start, it doesn't matter what end of the problem you're starting on. Just start at one end and start working your way backwards.
Yep.
Ultimately, what you're going to do is be able to eliminate, oh, well, it's not my network. Okay, let's start looking at the PC. Okay, well, my PC is getting taxed a little bit. Let's see what's getting taxed. Oh, maybe you don't have the CPU. Maybe you're overloading your network interface card. There's a lot of options that exist there.
What is the coolest NDI based product that you've seen hit the marketplace, and why is it cool?
I don't know, Matt. I'm gonna have to go with Bridge. I think that's the most innovational and game changing NDI feature that's been brought out probably in the last year, right?
I would have. I can search for something else if you guys want me to, but I would land on the same thing because I feel like we're just seeing the beginning of what Bridge has to offer, and we're going to see it integrate with more and more things moving forward, which is just same thing NDI originally brought to the table and making the idea of moving content around your network easy. I have a feeling we're going to see them doing the exact same thing, but now remote, so it's worldwide. You're no longer confined to your network. The same ease is going to be brought to content. If you want to access something that's over in Europe, no big deal. You can do it, and it's not going to be complex to do or super expensive.
Thank you so much again to Stephen and Matt for walking us through the NDI technology. And we had some great questions from our teams that were in the call with us. However, if you are watching this during the premiere, by all means, we are actually in the comments right now answering questions. And if this is after the premiere and you're watching it on YouTube, go ahead, toss more questions into the comments. We always monitor them. We always interact with you out there in the world. Now, with that, we would like to thank you again for joining us. We're doing this again next month to talk about a different topic in the Pro AV space. So keep an eye out for that. And the only way you're going to find out what that is if you like, subscribe, and even share, stay involved with this channel to learn more about new technologies in Pro AV and broadcast. And with that, again, my name is William Golde, the Director of Channel Sales here at PTZOptics and HuddleCamHD. If you have any questions and you want to get in touch with us, reach out to partners@PTZOptics.com or go ahead and head over to the website. Just give us a call at the number there. We look forward to hearing from you, and we can't wait to hear about your project.